Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Dolan. Welcome to another episode of Wisconsin Icons. My title sponsors are Pasternak and Zergabel, injury attorneys. They're located in Brookfield, Wisconsin. Their website is at www.injurywisconsin.com. And also my acknowledgement to Town Bank with the branches all over the state. Their information can be found at www.townbank.us. Now, my icon in this episode is a group of people. It's the Milwaukee Braves, the baseball team, and iconic for, I think, three reasons. One, they came here in the first place. They left Boston to play in Milwaukee, and at that time, that the relocations just did not occur. In fact, the Braves, I believe, were the first team in about 50 years to leave one city for another. So they're iconic because they came here. Two, they're iconic because they were really good. They won the 1957 World Series. They beat the Yankees in 7 games. They almost went back to back. 1958, once again, they were the National League champs. And in the World Series, this time they lost to the Yankees in 7 games. So they were just so talented and so beloved and with some remarkable achievements. Still, of course, as we all know, the only Milwaukee baseball team to ever win a World Series. And three, they're iconic because, not in a good way, because they left. So they come here from Boston, they leave here for Atlanta, and it broke people's hearts. And old time Brave fans still look back with great regret and great anger and frustration and heartbreak that the fact that their beloved Braves left. So why did that happen? And are there villains in the move, in the relocation from Milwaukee to Atlanta? My guest is Patrick Steele, who knows so much about the entire Brave story. Patrick is the author of a book called Home of the Braves, The Battle for Baseball in Milwaukee. Patrick Steele, good morning and welcome to Wisconsin Icons. I'm thrilled to have you on.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm always excited to get a chance to talk about the Braves and talk a little, about the work that I've done. So,
I love your hat.
well, thank you, thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
It's one of many I have. I kind of wear them out after a while. So
Yeah, yeah. It's funny how the older we get, we turn more to caps like that. I do too. I've got a closet full of about 50 of them, and it's
yeah.
probably to cover what's up here or what's left up here. So, uh, I've been looking forward to this, Pat, because I'm a big baseball guy.
Mhm.
And I'm very interested, always been intrigued by the Milwaukee Braves. Now, like you, I never saw the Braves. I was born a
Mhm.
little late after the Braves, but they've always held a very special place in my heart just because of all the dozens of old timers that I've
Yeah.
talked to over the years who did watch the Braves. And
Yeah.
there seems to be a very high level of emotion connected to this team between fan and players, fan and franchise.
Yeah.
It's off the charts.
Yeah.
Today we talk about, oh yeah, we love the Brewers, we love the Packers, etc. But it seems to be a different level with those who follow the Braves, and I've always wondered why. So your book is fascinating. Your book answers a lot of questions. I explained as I introduced you, Patrick, that in my mind, there are three reasons that the Braves as a franchise are iconic. One, they came here in the first place.
Yeah.
And back then, relocation of Major League Baseball teams didn't occur all that often. In fact,
Right.
I think it was about 50 years previous
It
to.
was 50 years
Yeah,
almost to the day.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's big time. So that's iconic. Two, the most obvious reason is they were really good. They
Yeah.
won the World Series, could have won two in a row. And three, the most heartbreaking of all, is the fact that they left. So all three achievements in my mind are iconic. So let's start right at the beginning, Patrick. What's your allegiance to the Braves? What's your connection, your interest to take so much time and research out of your life about this franchise?
Well, when I was a kid growing up, in West Bend, which is just outside Milwaukee, I grew up listening to Euchre and going to Brewer games. I actually got to see Henry Aaron play for the Brewers. He was a designated hitter that day. Got walked, got run for by, I believe, Jimmy Gantner, if I remember correctly. You know, but it's a funny story. I was relatively young, and I had gotten a book on great baseball heroes. So this is from the early 1970s. So some of the players are going back fairly recently. There's this thing in there on Willie Mays and a bunch of things. And then there was one on Henry Aaron. And Hank Aaron was always my favorite player. And they showed these early pictures. He's got an M on his head. And I'm trying to process why it's got Braves on his jersey and an M on his hat. And so I finally went on and I asked my mom, I said, why does he have an M on his hat? And my mom's eyes just welled up. And, she started talking about the Braves being in Milwaukee. And again, as a young kid, I didn't know that because, again, I was born after they left. And my mom was a diehard Braves fan. I mean, she used to go out to, ladies' days, and just my mom still loves baseball. It's where I got my love of baseball from. And, just to see the hurt in her eyes when she talked
Yeah.
about the
Yeah.
team, and it was like, it wasn't like a bitter, but it was like somebody you were talking about who passed away before their time, and you still wax nostalgic thinking about them all these years later. You just think of the good things. So honestly, that's really what started it. And then in the mid to late 80s, Bob Beege wrote his book called Milwaukee Braves, a Baseball Eulogy. And Bob's book is phenomenal. If you want to know anything about the on-field Braves, get his book, And he has a section at the end where he talks about the team leaving. And it didn't really answer the questions that I felt as a kid or as a fan, I really wanted to know. So that always sat in the back of my mind. So I've had a chance to meet Bob, and Bob, of course, wrote the intro for my book. And I said, I wrote my book to be part 2 of yours.
Hmm.
And so my thought is always that, if you want to know about the on the field stuff, you grab Bob Beege's book. If you want to know why they left, grab my book. And between the two of them, you have the encompassing story of the Milwaukee Braves. So that's really what it was.
It's very gracious of you to give Bob so much credit. And I've read Bob's book, and it is indeed outstanding. Going back to something you started with, Patrick, I wonder if that was the only time in Jim Gatner's history that he was the pinch runner.
I don't know.
Yeah. He was not
like I
exactly
said, I mean, I'm a kid. I mean, that was, 50 years ago. I couldn't really remember, but that's just what I always remembered, and because he would have been a young guy at that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's, why did they, I want to focus on why they left, but we'll say that for last. Why did they come here in the first place? They were the Boston Braves. They were, the younger brother, I suppose, of the Boston Red Sox. But, why did they come here in the first place?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for it. Baseball dynamics were changing in the 1940s. And there's a lot of things happening, and television, of course, is going to be impactful. But sometimes there's, relationship reasons. Sometimes there's direct cause and effect, and sometimes we misread them. The Boston Braves were not a particularly successful franchise. And what you're going to find when you go through the teams that have moved, historically, they've not been very successful, which is why they move. The Braves went to the World Series in 1948, played the Cleveland Indians, lost in 6 games to Bill Vack's team. The only time Bill Vack ever won a World Series. In the aftermath of that, Lou Perini, who ran the club as president of the Boston Braves, agreed to allow the television broadcast of Boston Braves games. Now, you have to remember back, Bob, 49, 50, how many televisions were there in homes, right? Virtually none. If you're going to go watch a game at a bar, you're watching 1 or 2 camera angles, and it's probably, the size of, my desk behind me, but the screen is probably about as big as an iPad, right? You're not really watching the game there, right? It's on, okay? Well, between 1948 and 1952, the Braves bled off about 90% of their attendance.
Whoa.
In 1952, they drew just over 200, I think it was 260,000, kind of in that ballpark.
Wow.
And that's just atrocious.
Did they have their own park, or did they play in Fenway?
No, I play at Boston, or at Braves Field.
Okay. All right.
And Braves Field, again, it had the same problem Fenway did. There wasn't adequate parking, and the Red Sox weren't the Red Sox yet. They weren't the iconic Boston team yet, And honestly, had the Braves not left, you can make the case that the Red Sox might have. Because Boston and its metro area is roughly the same size as Milwaukee and its outlying counties, where we drew most of our attendance from. So if you could do it, it's a direct apples to apples comparison. There's no way Milwaukee could support 2 baseball franchises. Right. So, I mean, one of them was going to have to go. And it's going to be the same thing in Philadelphia, that you just don't have a big enough metropolitan area to support 2 major league franchises, plus football, plus basketball, whatever else is going on, right? So there was a couple things Perini realized in 52. He had the makings of a good team, that there were some guys matriculating their way through Milwaukee, which was their AAA spot in the American Association. And the minor league Brewers won the Little World Series in 51. They'll win it again in 52. So there's some good players coming through. And one of the first ones was rookie Eddie Matthews, who came up to Boston in 52. And, obviously will play his way into the Hall of Fame. And you got Warren Spahn, and you've got, the makings at least of a decent staff. Now, I'll say this about Lou Perini. Lou Perini was every bit a Boston guy as Bud Selig was a Milwaukee guy. Okay. So as I'm talking about this, I need you to understand that the comparison I'm going to make is if you were, and I know you were around in the 90s when the whole discussion over Miller Park was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And when they had that first vote, and before George Petak changed his vote, right, the Senate refused to fund Miller Park. And the look on Bud Selig's face was obvious that there was no way he was going to be able to keep the team here. County Stadium was antiquated. It was outdated. He couldn't do it. He was going to end up moving his team to either Tampa or Phoenix. Now, let's just say hypothetically they go to Tampa, right? Do you really think Bud Selig's going to be a big Tampa guy?
Yeah.
So he can be sitting in the parades and doing all this stuff in the 18. Sure. Where does Bud want to be? Bud's heart was in Milwaukee.
Sure.
Right. So I think in the grand scheme of things that this is where Lou Perini's sitting. He wants to do whatever it takes to save the team. So he actually put out a couple proposals for some alterations to Braves Field. He wanted to change the lines a little bit, make it easier for some scoring. Right. So he's going to move it, the home plate out a little bit. And he wanted to lower the field just a little bit so that it was easier for fans to get a better view in some of the areas. And just he had a couple different unique proposals. And the National League kind of shot it down, and they weren't really cooperative with him in some of the changes he wanted to do. And he's looking at ticket sales. And going into the 1953 season, he had sold only 414 season tickets.
My goodness.
And you look at the two numbers and you realize, okay, this is not good. Now, he made his money from construction. Okay. So it's not like he couldn't weather the storm. Okay. He probably couldn't. That's what his goal is. He believes, look, the team is good enough. If we just get past this hurdle, right? Get the team winning again, all of a sudden your attendance starts spiking up, and, maybe then things go out, and then it'll be him that stays and the Red Sox that'll leave. Again, not really sure, but one of the two is going to have to make it, right? So this is his plan. And going into spring training, Bill Veeck comes back into the picture. Now, Bill Veeck had sold his interest in the Cleveland Indians, and like Bill Veeck did, never had two nickels to his name, but could always put a group together to buy a major league team. He owned the White Sox twice. He owned the Cleveland Indians. The guy just, he was that guy. And he bought into the Boston Braves. Now, into the St. Louis Browns. So I'm going to take a little sidestep so you kind of understand all the dynamics that are kind of going on here. Because it all comes together in this perfect storm, which I hate using that analogy, but frankly, it works here. St. Louis had two teams, right? You got the Cardinals, you got the Browns. The Cardinals ownership in 52 was not really well supported by the fellow National League owners. And he had been involved in some skeptical business stuff, and the league was actually going to force the team to basically dump the owner. You want to say the franchise, you got to dump the owner. So Fred Miller of Miller Brewing had actually gone down to St. Louis and made some overtures to buying the team in 1952. Right. And rumors were kicking out that it was going to be the Milwaukee Cardinals. And imagine how different, again, our lives are. Yeah, you're from St. Louis. I'm from here. If the Cardinals are here and you're talking to me as a Browns fan.
It's the only scenario I can imagine,
right,
Patrick, where the Milwaukee Cardinals would be beloved in Milwaukee, because the Cardinals.
Well, absolutely. And it's funny because one of the most iconic voices in Wisconsin, Jim Irwin, grew up as a St. Louis Browns fan.
Yeah.
So, okay. So anyways, and of course, the Browns had their origins. They were one of the first American League teams. They were part of the, the original group. They were in Milwaukee for 1 year. Failed in Milwaukee, moved to St. Louis. So there's a Milwaukee connection to them, right? So anyways, we don't get it. Augie Busch buys the Cardinals. Of course, the rest is history down in St. Louis. So we missed out. So the next one is the Browns. When the Browns came up for sale. Again, Miller wants to go down there and wants to use his personal assets and the strength of Miller Brewing to get the team to bring it to Milwaukee, because Milwaukee was building a new municipal stadium, ostensibly for the minor league Brewers. And this was pushed through. And again, Miller was one of the big movers and shakers. And the idea was, in the back of everybody's mind, this is going to be a major league stadium.
Okay.
But if we have a minor league team playing here for 4 or 5 years, everybody's going to think of it as a minor league ballpark. We want it, if we're going to open this 53, we want to have a major league team. So they make some overtures. And again, I'm really trying to, make this simplified. Bill Veck's group outbid Fred Miller. And Veck and Miller had been friends. Miller had supported and actually helped televise some of the Brewers games, the minor league Brewers games in Milwaukee, had paid for radio rights, done all the other stuff. And he just felt a little bit betrayed that Bill Veck had done that to him. So now we're 0 for 2 for St. Louis teams, right? So into the mix, we're starting to roll into 53. Spring training's right around the corner, and Bill Veck makes the fabled announcement that he would like to seek permission to move the Browns to Milwaukee. They're playing in Sportsman's Park. They own it, but the Cardinals are a much bigger draw. So his thought is, look, we're never going to make it here. We can sell the stadium to Bush and his group, move the team back to Milwaukee. It's got a new stadium, and we will be beloved and embraced, because he knew Milwaukee. He had owned the minor league Brewers for a while, right? So he's got a great personal connection up here. Lived up in West Bend, my hometown, for a while. So he knows this area, and of course his baseball lineage is legendary. His father was the president of the Chicago Cubs. So, I mean, he knows baseball inside and out. The problem is the Boston Braves own the territorial rights to Milwaukee because they bought the minor league Brewers. So after World War II, Bill Veck sold the team to a Chicago group. They in turn sold it to Lou Perini and his brothers. And that's honestly where this cap comes from. It was originally a minor league Brewers cap. After the Boston Braves bought it, they took the B's off and they just put white M's on it. And so the minor league Brewers, this is what they had before the Braves came. So 1953 rolls around, you get into March, Veck goes public, says he wants to go. And then now you've got, Fred Miller is, okay, well, he's a little hacked off. He didn't get part of it. And Lou Perini immediately says no. And there's a series of meetings eventually between Fred Miller and Lou Perini. Now, what Veck did by saying, I want to do this, was he lit the fire to get something done now. Now, I'll be real honest with you. If I'm Lou Perini and I really want to be in Boston, if Fred Miller comes to my house and says, you're going to be the most hated man in Wisconsin if you don't do this, what do I care? Mm-hmm. What am I ever doing a construction job in Wisconsin, right? But he started looking at the numbers. So his group reached back out to Milwaukee County Stadium, to Milwaukee County rather, and said, well, there's a series of improvements. If we're going to agree to come, you got to put better lights in. There's office space. There's all this other additions that need to be put in the new ballpark. And the county made it clear they were willing to do that, and they were willing to work with them. So after some serious debate, and I really think he was a little bit heartbroken by this. Now, again, I don't really know Lou Perini's mind. I mean, his family does, but again, I can't look in anybody's heart. Bob, you can't look in mine. I can't look in yours. I don't know what your thought process is. There's rumors, well, he looked to move the team to Montreal. There was other teams, the only reason Milwaukee was available is because they had this stadium, and, it made sense. But Miller's going, we've got a broadcast package we can put together, right? Well, Phil Wrigley's already said he's going to waive, any territorial rights to southeastern Wisconsin, where, because of the geographic location between Milwaukee and Chicago, it makes sense. You got an automatic rival, right away in North Chicago. There's a lot of this that makes sense. And again, Perini's just like, I just don't want to do it. I think we can make it, and was really obstructionist. And of course, then Bill Veck's getting louder about wanting to go. In the American League, all they want to do is get rid of Bill Veck. Because they consider him a socialist. We're talking about things like, salary caps and things like that. So push comes to shove. And finally, Perini realizes, looking at the numbers, this is maybe an opportunity too good to pass up. So on March 17th, he goes to the National League owners, asks for permission to move. It's unanimous. They grant it to him. And it's announced that the Braves will be going from Bradenton, Florida, from spring training to Milwaukee instead of returning to Boston. And again,
The regular
people
season.
that worked in Boston were given a chance to come to Milwaukee, secretaries, those types of things, but office equipment, all that stuff was rerouted to go, to
They had
Milwaukee. So
they had 3 weeks.
yeah,
So they did. I mean, usually you'd wait a season at least. They
yeah,
announced on March 17th, and in April we're playing Major League Baseball
yeah.
in Milwaukee.
Yeah, Bob, but the same thing happened with the Brewers.
That's
That
incredible.
they came out of bankruptcy court in spring training, and the buses sat in the middle of the two. No wonder whether they're going to Seattle or Milwaukee. The decision was
Yeah,
made to
yeah,
going to Milwaukee.
yeah.
So, I mean, that this did happen. And again, that's what was such a shock about it. So when the team broke spring training, headed to Wisconsin, they had a special train bringing them in, and Mayor Zeidler meets them out there. I mean, just there was a lot of positive, real buzz that it was Major League Baseball. And this is where, the problem comes in almost immediately. One of the things Lou Perini doesn't want is television rights, because he believed that had hurt the team in Boston,
Yeah.
right? That, you bleed off 90% of your attendance. He doesn't want to have to deal with it. So it's going to be radio. And so for most of their time in Milwaukee, Braves games were not televised unless it was the World Series or an All-Star game or something like that. And then eventually by the early 60s, there'll be some road games. But the county agreed with this as well, because the county felt if you're watching games for free on television, you're not buying a ticket to the stadium.
Absolutely.
So there was a couple other things. They did get a sweetheart deal on the front end. But in all the years they were in Milwaukee from 1953 through the 1965 season, they had to maintain the park, and they had to maintain the parking lots. They never got one dime of parking lot revenue. And that's going to be part of the deal when they go to Atlanta. They'll get some of the parking. So, but again, it was a sweetheart deal. Team comes, and then this is where, again, excuse me, my book gets a little bit different, because I don't really talk about the baseball in the field. I talk about the dynamics of this type of thing. But one thing you have to understand is every other team that moved was a bad team. I said this probably about 15 minutes ago. Any team that moves is usually a terrible team. There's a reason they move.
The only you're right. The only exception to that I can recall would be the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Right, but that's later on. This is on the front end.
Okay, very good.
The team that moved, right, and again, that's a whole different dynamic with Walter O'Malley.
Yeah.
But with the Braves, when they moved, they were on the verge of being good, and they went from 7th place, I believe, in 52. They finished in 2nd place in 1953. So you had the buzz of a good team that pumped up attendance, and they were good, that pumped up attendance. So I've always said this, the numbers for the Braves were artificially high. There's a great saying you can talk about the Milwaukee Braves. There's 2 ways to look at it. Number one, in the entire time they were here, 13 seasons, they were the number 2 drawing team in Major League Baseball, behind only the Brooklyn Los Angeles Dodgers. Okay? That's a great statistic. You were number 2 out of everybody. Okay? The flip side is your attendance was a third of what it was in the beginning. So most of the attendance numbers were on the front end. But again, that was because the team came and they were good. Every other team that came, moved. Eventually, you see a bump of interest, and then it settles into what the normal would be. I will argue, if you take the Braves attendance and you invert it, and they draw 550,000 that first year, you'd go, okay, that was a successful move, because we almost doubled what we had done the year before in Boston, right? And then you invert everything else and build up to that 1.2 million, 1.5 million, 2 million, all of a sudden you're sitting there going, this is a success story. But because it was front loaded and it tailed off at the end, people thought baseball interest was dying in Milwaukee, which was not a true statement. Baseball interest across America was in decline. Milwaukee was just typical. And if you think about what was unique about the 1960s for Wisconsin fans, we had Vince Lombardi. So
we'll quickly gloss over the 13 years here, because most of us are familiar with that story. But you do bring up 2 very good points. From start to finish, I believe they never had a losing season.
Never did.
Which, I mean, that's off the charts. And you mentioned the gate. Now, it may well have started high and sort of petered out a little bit for 13, but still, in that total time frame, they had a loyal fan base, which probably both factors. They were good and they had the fan. That's probably 2 big factors in why so many people's hearts were broken 13 years later when they left, because the average fan's going, wait a minute, we've done our part. We've supported. They're good. We love them. They love being in Milwaukee. Why are they leaving? And
Right.
I go way back to when we first chatted. And I said, every old Braves guy that I've ever talked to, they don't get it. They still don't get it. Their
Yeah.
hearts are still broken. They still
Yeah.
remember the day it was announced, and they don't know why. Well,
Yeah.
you know why. I mean,
Yeah.
you wrote a book about it. So if
Yeah.
you can, I know I'm asking you to, condense a 300-page book into Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
Um, why did they leave? What happened?
Well, there's a variety of things that happen. First of all, the sweetheart deal they got from the county is going to be dissipated after they won the World Series in '57. Milwaukee County's attitude was basically, okay, now we make our money back. And I've always said I can understand both sides of the argument. I can understand the county saying this. Look, on good faith, we built a stadium, for tax relief, whatever for the, for the fans. Therefore the county should be making, revenue from it.
Yeah.
And neither side wanted long-term stadium deals, right? So let's say, for example, you're a visionary and you can go back in time, and in that last contract negotiation, I think in '61, you get them to agree to do a 20-year, lease. Braves are still here.
Yeah.
They never would have left. But because the county always kept agreeing to these short-term 3-year or 5-year deals, right? They always end at some point.
Sure.
Now, the county controlled everything, Bob. And I'll say this, when I started this book, everybody I talked to was angry. And again, and I told this to Bob Beatty too. I said, everybody blames the owners. It's the new syndicate that came in, bought the team from Perini when he sold the team. And eventually, within a year, they're announcing the team's moving to Atlanta. And I said, there's just got to be more to this story than that. And so I kind of I understood everybody's anger, and that's the way I kind of went into this. Okay, I want to find out why this happens, and I became sympathetic. I became sympathetic to the Braves organization.
Wow.
Because I'm like, holy crap! If I were treated like this by the county, I don't think I'd want to stick around either. You've been to County Stadium. At its peak, was it ever the Taj Mahal? Was it a destination place like Tiger Stadium? Were people bragging, hey, look, I went to go to County Stadium, or are they going to brag they went to Fenway, right? I mean, it didn't have any of that. It looked like it was designed by an East German architecture group and put together by Soviet construction crews, and I love County Stadium. I do. I still love County Stadium. But let's be honest, it was just a municipal stadium. There was no charm.
You would love stadiums in the Soviet Union, I guess.
Apparently, but the county thought it was this Taj Mahal, and the Braves were paying more to play in County Stadium by the 1960s than any other team in Major League Baseball was paying to play in theirs.
Wow.
So the finance, plus you don't get any parking revenue, plus the county gets to control every price. You want to raise a price on a T-shirt sold or a cap sold the county had to approve it. And Milwaukee County alone, despite the fact most of the fan base came from outside of Milwaukee County. So that's part one. Part two, Perini took his company public, and one of the biggest assets that was part of the company was the Milwaukee Braves. And in 1962, after some losses, he agreed to sell the team, and there was not local ownership that came up front. Now, Selig's group will offer the other group, basically, hey, look, we'll buy it. We'll give you exactly what you paid. We'll cover your losses. Just give us the team. You walk away. The ownership group, led by Bill Bartholomew, and I spoke with him on the phone probably for 2 hours. And again, went through the questions of a lot of different things. And I got to the feeling, because in teaching as long as I have, you learn to listen to things, the story between the stories. And I'm listening to the I asked, well, of course, did you buy the team to move it? Well, no, we did try to save it. And I went back and looked at the record of things they've tried to do. So when the new ownership group bought it, they were relatively young. I think Bartholomew was in his early 30s. They had bought in actually to the Chicago White Sox and hoping the Allen brothers were going to sell the majority to them. If that happens, the Braves are still here, right? But they bought into the team, thinking that if you look at the numbers, if this is what average attendance is, we can do this. They overpaid for the team. They had balloon payments coming up, and attendance wasn't matching what it was in the early 1950s. And if you want to keep the team, you have to resolve that problem. So they tried to do a stock sale like the Packers had. And they put Vince Lombardi on their board of directors, right? And so this idea was, we're going to be like the Packers. We're going to have this greater community ownership. and it never happened. So, in the grand scheme of things, there had been a push to put a new stadium down in Atlanta. It started actually in Kansas City with William O. Finley, who told the people in Atlanta, look, if you build a stadium, I'll bring the athletics down there. So they did the same thing Milwaukee did. They built a stadium, and it was new and it was modern. And the first rumors that the Braves were going to go was in 63. Now, again, this was not uncommon. There's actually rumors the Braves were leaving Milwaukee as early as 1955. Every team was rumored to be moving. The Yankees were rumored to be going to Sacramento. I mean, there's just a lot of this, right? So what happened was the stock sale failed. You have a contentious relationship with the county. You have a new stadium in Atlanta that offers a 7-state radio network. Okay. My daughter right now and her family, they live in Tennessee. They are part of the Braves radio network to this day, right? You can't compete with that in Milwaukee because in Milwaukee now you're landlocked. You got the Chicago teams to the south, you got the Twins to the west, you've got, the Yoopers to the north, and you got the lake to the east. You can't expand. And when Coca-Cola comes along and they're going to offer millions of dollars for broadcast rights, the best the Eline family can do with Schlitz is go, well, we can go 500,000 a year or something like that. Anybody who ran a company would look at those numbers and go, I'd go to Atlanta too. So there's a lot of this that kind of plays into it. And the fact that the county really was obstructions, the county didn't think they would go anywhere. And when the Braves announced in October of 1964, they planned to play the 1965 season in Atlanta, of course, you have one of two choices. You can either let them go, stay in the good graces of baseball, or you can fight them. And Milwaukee chose to fight. Took them to federal court. And again, you eventually have dueling court decisions from, courts in Atlanta or Georgia, rather, courts in Wisconsin. You have dueling opinions. And eventually the Supreme Court refuses to pick it up. And there's really nothing you can do. The Braves are on their way. And again, the irony is there was only two teams that could have moved at that time. One was Milwaukee, the other was Cleveland. Both had stadium deals. And at the last minute, the city of Cleveland came in and gave a big sweetheart deal to the Indians to fix up their stadium.
Patrick, it's easy with this relocation, with most relocations in all of professional sports. Usually the fan will easily blame the ownership. You're greedy, you're this, you're that, you don't care about us. If I'm reading you right, your opinion that the villain in this case was not the ownership, it was county government.
I think it lean more towards county government. Again, I think that's kind of the way I've come down to. But Bob, the way I've tried to write the book is anybody who's read it, that's the first question I always ask them is who's the villain?
Okay.
Because I try to be fair to all sides and let the reader come to their own conclusion.
Yeah.
And I've had people go, I always blamed the owner, but now I really get it. I've had other people go, well, I knew it was the county. And I've had people go, well, it was Lou Perini. If Lou Perini would have been more public about what his concerns were, or had he sold, again, the legendary story, well, if he just sold to Fred Miller, they'd still be here, right?
Yeah.
When I was writing the book, my son said to me, because he was reading a couple chapters, he goes, Dad, why did, Lou Perini, sell to Fred Miller? I mean, that would have solved all the problems. And I didn't have the heart to tell him. But I finally said, Scott, Fred Miller was killed in December of 1954 in a plane crash. That's not an option anymore. And, in Sports Illustrated, when he's eulogizing, Lou Perini comes out and he goes, well, had he lived, we were in negotiations to sell the team, blah, blah, blah. Well, in the court case in 66, Lou Perini denied he ever said that. And he had no intentions of ever selling Fred Miller. So some people say, well, maybe Lou Perini's to blame. Lou Perini had gone after the Dodgers and Giants went out. He actually met with city officials in New York in 58. Again, remember, they won the series in 57. And he's, meeting with them in 58, 59. And people are going, was he talking about moving the team out there? Or was he looking to get an expansion team? Sell the club here, get an expansion team there. I don't know. I don't know all I know is he was a Boston guy. And I just don't think he liked being this far from home. And I think, it's the same thing with Bill Bartholomew, ultimately, when the team moved to Atlanta. And I've told this story repeatedly, but it's one Bill told me. And I think that this is valuable for our conversation right now. I asked him flat out, did you buy the team to move? And he said, no. Look, he's like, his wife and him, they had a house in Lake Geneva. They could go from Lake Geneva to the President's Box at County Stadium in 40 minutes. He's like, to go to a game in Atlanta, we had to get on a plane, fly down to Atlanta, do all this stuff. But he's like, our home was in Chicago, our business was in Chicago, our kids were going to school in Chicago. He's like, that was difficult. And it would have been dramatically easier to have it in Milwaukee. And I think there's maybe a level of truth to that. I don't know if people want to hear that or not.
Patrick, you've been fascinating. I knew you would. And your explanation helps answer a lot of questions, except this one. We're still all heartbroken. Yeah,
Yeah.
understandable. I mean,
Yeah.
you got guys like Eddie Matthews and Warren Spahn and Hank Aaron moving.
Yeah.
I mean, that's going to stick with you the rest of your life. Tell me more
Yeah.
about your book. Where can we buy it, etc.?
It's available at Amazon, a lot of other places.
Okay.
It's available both in hardcover and paperback. And again, if you anybody who ever reads it, if you reach out to me, just answer the question who you think the villain in the story is. So I'm actually working on part 2 of the book,
Are you?
which it'll cover basically from the court case in '66 to the Milwaukee Brewers coming.
Oh, very
So
good.
filling in why Milwaukee was passed over for expansion. I'm also talking about why the pilots failed in Seattle, which created the dynamic ultimately for Selig's group to come in and basically purchase the team out of bankruptcy court and bring baseball back just 5 years later.
Well, you've clearly identified your passion. I tip my cap to you. And I appreciate your time today and answering some very difficult questions. Patrick, you take care and thanks.
Thank you, Bob, for the opportunity. I really do appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.